أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين رحمة للعالمين بالقاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وقوله الحق بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله اصطفاك وطهرك واصطفاك على النساء العالمين صلوا على محمد وآله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. The issue of women in Islam is a topic that many of us have heard many times, and we're probably even tired of hearing of that topic. But there are certain women who have played major role in our history that we never hear about. I want to focus on some women in the Shia faith. Normally when we talk of women in the Shia faith, we talk and we think of Hazrat Zainab, Hazrat Fatima, Khadija, and Masum Qum, and so on. And quite rightly so. But there are other women whose role has never been acknowledged. I would go so far as to say that had they not been there, we would not have been where we are today. And I will try and prove that to you. But first of all, some general comments regarding women in Islam. Because as we know, women are portrayed very negatively in the West, whether it is on TV, cartoons, social media, etc. Unfortunately, even some of the hadith literature, especially amongst our brothers and sisters in the Sunni literature, you'll find women are depicted very negatively. Something that we, because of the high esteem that we have of women, you will not find in the Shia hadith. So for example, in Bukhari, it says that 3 things invalidate your prayer. If you are praying, if that one of those 3 things passes in front of you, your salat is batil. One is a dog. Excuse me. Second is a donkey. And third is a woman. When Aisha heard this, to her credit, she said, Astaghfirullah, how can you say this? The Prophet used to pray and my feet were right in front of him because the room was very small. So she discredited it. Sometimes you'll find in the hadith literature also that when the Prophet went for Mi'raj, he saw women hanging by their hair. Have you heard that? Simply because either they were not wearing hijab or they were disobeying their husbands. So one teacher was saying this in the madrasa, and a 5-6-year-old student, he got up, he says, Malim, I have a question though. He said, what? He said, but women only go to Jahannam or Jannat after Qiyamah. This has not even happened yet. Correct or not? The Prophet went for Mi'raj, but women were not even in Jannah or Jannah at that time because Jannah or Jahannam comes after Qiyamah. And the teacher said, well, I don't know the answer to that. So sometimes even the students know more than the teacher. However, to answer to those who think that Muslim women are looked down upon, it is perhaps ironic that America has never had a female president. Clinton tried, Hillary, but she didn't quite make it. But a country as small as Tanzania has a president who's female at the moment, right? Samia, and she's doing quite a good job. But you might be surprised to know that historically, women, there have been no less than 40, women, female heads of Muslim states in the past. No less than 40 in the past, let alone the present. 15 of them were addressed as, we used to have sultans. They were called sultanas because they were female. And this stretches back to a long period of history, so much so that their names were minted on the coins. They used to mint coins in those days, like they do it in England with the insignia of the queen or now the king. And their names were even recited in the khutbah. In the olden days, the sultan's name was actually recited in the khutbah. The first woman who actually was the female head of state in the Islamic world came in 1256. We're talking of the 13th century. And you know where? You will probably never guess it. Not Iran, but India. India had the first woman, female, her name was Radhiya, Sultana Radhiya, who came to power in 1256 in Delhi. They did not have New Delhi in those days. And 14 years later, in 1450, a female also came to the head as the head of state in Egypt, in Cairo. And Shajaratul Dur was her name. So you can see that the idea of women, Muslim women being head of state, is an old one. On Radhiya's coins, the coin that she made in Egypt, the coin read, and we still have it in our record, for Shajaratul Dur in Cairo, the khutbah was, "May Allah protect the beneficent one, the queen of all the Muslims," referring to Shajaratul Dur. She is the blessed of the earthly world, and she is the blessed of the faith. And that tells us, someone like, you may have heard the Empress Nur Jahan. She was the head of the Mughal Empire. The Mughal Empire lasted in India for almost 300 years before the British put an end to it. She herself, her name was Nur Jahan. She was the head of the whole Mughal Empire in the 17th century. Even militarily, and you'll be surprised that these things are on Google, Sheikh Google as this is called now, but we don't have access to it, or we don't want to look at it. In the Mughal Empire again, there was a king by the name of Ghiyath Shah, and he had an army of women who were protecting other women. And they are called Habish Band, Habiwash, for whoever was making a note of this, Habish Band, and you can look it up. 500 Muslim women wielding swords and knives, protecting women and even protecting men. Women have played major roles in different fields in our world, in the Islamic world. And perhaps the most prominent one that is mentioned in the Quran is Hazrat Maryam alayhi salam, which directly mentioned in the Quran. Inna Allah astafaki wa taharaki wa astafaki ala nisa'il alameen. Allah has chosen you, has purified you, O Maryam, and has chosen you over all the women in the universe in her time. This is how Allah addresses Maryam. And Maryam was not only the mother of Isa alayhi salam, she was a very pious woman. A woman whose piety, whose taqwa knew no boundaries. The only person, you may know the history, the only person who was allowed to visit Maryam in the temple, because she was in the temple. The old temple of Sulaiman is mentioned in the Quran, and at that time it was still there. The only person who could visit her was Zakaria. Kullama dakhala alayha al-mihrab, Zakaria, anytime, every time that Zakaria entered the mihrab, there was a mihrab there, wajda in the rizq, that there was rizq there. Ya Maryamu, anni laki hadha. Oh Maryam, where did this come from? I'm the only one who visits you. Nobody comes to you. Where did the food come from? I did not bring it. قالت هذا من عند الله. This is from Allah. Wallahu yarzuqu man yasha'u bighayri hisab. Allah feeds whoever He wishes without any accounting. Allah does not need to account to anybody. What does it tell us? It tells us that when you are pure and you are pious, whether you are male or female, Allah sustains you. Allah looks after you. So, and Zakaria was so inspired. Zakaria is no ordinary person. He's a prophet. But he is so inspired by what happened to Maryam, he goes outside and he, hunalika da'a Zakaria. At that time, Zakaria goes outside and prays to Allah. Rabbi la tadhirni fardan wa anta khairul warithin. Do not leave me without a legatee, an inheritor, because you are the worst of one who gives legatees. Sallu ala Muhammad wa alayhi. I want to turn to the Shia women that I was talking about, women who have played major roles in our history. First of all, let me address the question as to where do we get this information from? If we have not heard it from the Mimbar, Where do we get these? And I'll quote you various examples. We have different types of literature. One is called the Rijal literature. Rijal means men, but it includes women too. Rijal basically is what we call biography. In other words, we have a list of books which tell us who wrote when and where during the time of the Imams, and even after the times of the Imams. In other words, we have a list of people who wrote books and played major role in the hadith transmission. And in these books they tell us who wrote, what was his name, when did he live, and how reliable or unreliable that person was. Because after all, we only want to get the hadith from people who are reliable. And included in this are some of these women. So for example, Ayatollah al-Khuy has written a book on Rijal, 23 volumes. 23 volumes, Mu'jamur Rijal al-Hadith. And each volume is not a small little booklet, it's over 400 pages. Yeah, this is how our ulama work. And at one section he has also a list of women too. All our main books on Rijal or biography have lists of women. We also have hadith works, books on hadith, which are important, but they tell us who reported the hadith. When you carefully scrutinize it, you'll find the name of women in there too. And of course, we have historical works. So just to give you one example, the book of Sheikh al-Mufid, a very famous book, Kitab al-Irshad. When you read through that historical book, one of the main sources of Karbala was Hazrat Zainab. So you find women mentioned in different places. We might be surprised to know that women, Shia women, reported from all our Imams apart from the 11th and 12th Imams. Starting from the time of the Prophet up to the 11th Imam, women were reporting traditions from the Imams. Why not the 11th Imam? Because he was in house exile in Samarra. So therefore it was difficult to have access to the Imam at that time. And interestingly, these women reported on different topics. People tend to think that women will report on women's topics. No, on the contrary, on different subjects altogether. So to give you one example, Asma bin Umays, who was close to Hazrat Fatima, she reports hadith from Hazrat Fatima. And she reported famous hadith that Fatima alayhi salam told her that after I die, only you, that is Asma, or my husband Ali ibn Abi Talib can wash my body. Sallu ala Muhammad. You have to bear with my cough, unfortunately, it doesn't want to leave me at all. Another example was a lady called the aunt of Muhammad bin Ziyad. This lady, her name is not given, but she is called the aunt of, or Amma, the aunt of Muhammad bin Ziyad, reports to us traditions on the merits of Khake Shifa in Karbala. You know, we have certain merits of Karbala, and especially if you read a book by Ibn Qawlaway, Kamilu Ziyarat, which is now translated into English, and there you'll find traditions by this aunt of Muhammad bin Ziyad on the importance and the way the curative powers, as we call it, how he can cure you, the Khak of Shifa. Another famous lady was Aswad. She was called the Arifa. Arifa is a person who knows. She belonged to a particular clan. The Banu A'yan was a particular clan within Shia Islam, very close to the Imams. One of these figures, very famous figure, is a person by the name of Zurara. Zurara was a close companion of Imam al-Baqir and Imam al-Sadiq. This lady, who was a sister, Aswad was a sister of Zurara, closed his eyes, and she was the first one amongst the Banu Zurara to actually report on the succeeding Imam. You know, reporting the Imam, or the identity of the next Imam, was not easy for our people, for the Shias, because the Imams could not openly identify the successor. The political circumstances was such that they had to be very careful who they talked to and what they talked about. So many a time it is women. Women played an important role because, as we shall see, Whereas the men's quarter was open, anybody could enter the men's quarter. Nobody could enter the women's quarters because they're women. And therefore, even the government officials could not enter the women's quarter. The imams, many a time, when before they died, they had certain things that they had to pass on to their sons, their successor. Books, the swords, the weapons. And the women played an important role here because the imams had mothers, they had sisters, they had aunts, they had daughters. And these ladies played an important role in the transmission of the books, the weapons, the scrolls, whatever that the imam had to pass on, and even the identity of the next imam. There was one particular lady you may have heard of. She was called Aswad, and she plays an important role. Aslam. Aslam plays a very important role. She reported traditions from the Prophet up to Imam Zain al-Abidin. So she lived quite a long period, from the time of the Prophet to Imam Zain al-Abidin. She went to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali. He says, show me a way of identifying your successor. How do I know who is your successor? And his successor, and his successor. The Prophet took a stone and he says, give this stone to my successor. He will rub it. The stone will turn into sand. And he'll come back to a stone, and he will tell you, and you go and give it to his successor. And Aswad did the same thing. She went to Imam Ali, who turned that stone into sand and back into stone, and then went on up to the time of the fourth Imam. That was one way, not the only way, but one way, one important way of identifying the successor to the Imam. Similarly, we find that they transmitted the knowledge and the legacy of the Imams, because as I said, there were female members in the Imam's clan. Many a time they went to the Imams and reported some issues, some problems that they faced. And the Imams gave them the du'as, amal, to perform. We're talking of women here. You remember in the month of Rajab, we do the amal of Dawood. Dawood was a woman. Habiba was her actual name, and she goes to Imam Ja'far as-Sadiq alayhi salam, and she asks for a dua for her son, and also for anybody who's got trials and tribulations and bala. The Imam taught her this particular amal, and that's why we call it amal of Dawood, because it was reported to us by a woman. Similarly, we have other women who played other important roles. So Farwa, for example, was the mother of an Imam, mother of the sixth Imam. And this Farwa reported traditions from the fourth Imam up to the sixth Imam. Many a time we find that these women were links between the Imams and other Shias. So she would report from the Imam, and then she would then go report to another man. So it wasn't only that men were reporting. We call this isnad. Isnad means a chain of transmission, also called sanad sometimes. And the women also involved in it. As I say, we hardly ever hear about them, neither do we acknowledge their important role. So Farwa reported traditions from the fourth up to the sixth Imam, a very pious lady. One of the most important role that women played, and men could not play this role, and we've heard about it, but I do not know whether we've acknowledged it, was to report the birth of an Imam. Because after all, when a lady gives birth, only another lady can be there, or somebody who's her husband, but nobody else. It was here that women played a very important role. In those days, there were no hospitals as such that you would take a woman who is pregnant to a hospital. There would be a tabib, a doctor who might come and visit her. One of the most important reports that we have is the birth of our 12th Imam, Hazrat Hujjah alayhi salam. And who reports it? a lady called Hakima. Hakima was the daughter of the 9th Imam, the sister of the 10th Imam, and the aunt of the 11th Imam, therefore. For those who may not be aware, she is buried in Samarra. If you go to Samarra, inshallah we'll go there, you'll see 4 graves there. Hakima, Narjis Khatun, the mother of the 12th Imam, Imam Ali al-Naqi, and Imam Hassan al-Askari. They're all buried in the same sanctuary, the same shrine. Hakima is the one who reports, the only what we call eyewitness report. She says that on the eve of the 15th of Sha'ban, my nephew, that is the 11th Imam, called me. And he told me that come and break your fast with us because the Hujjah of Allah will be born today. And she reports, but she says, I could not see any visible sign of pregnancy. The mother of the 12th Imam normally reported Narjis, but there are other names also, Rayhana, Haditha, Sausan. The reason why she was given different names was because she should not be identified by the political caliphs. So she was given different names. But Hakima report that just before the time of Subh, the Imam, 12th Imam was born, and the first thing the Imam did when he was born, the 12th Imam, is he went to the sajda and recited the names of all the Imams before him. Sallu ala Muhammad. Similarly, as I said, the Imams had certain secrets, certain weapons, certain books, etc., which were supposed to be transmitted to the next Imam. So Sa'id al-Ahmasiyya was her name. I told you this is a name that we hardly ever hear of. Was a recipient of the secrets of Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam. And she is also, Sa'id is the one who reports the traditions regarding the visiting the graves of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. To the extent that she was so prominent and so pious, Sa'id, that there are reports that she will be raised when our 12th Imam comes out also. So it's not only the men who will be raised, by the way. Get that idea out of your mind. The women will be there also. As I said, especially when you look at the time of Imam al-Kadhim, the conditions were very difficult for the Imam at that time. In fact, he was, as you know, for 14 years in Baghdad in prison. He died in Baghdad. So in his case, he gave the to his wife, Salama, certain reports or certain things, elements that were supposed to be given to Imam al-Radha. Later on, Imam al-Radha himself asked for it from Salama and asked for it that, where are these that my father has given to you? So you can see that they played very important roles in different fields, to the extent that some of them wrote books that unfortunately we do not have. Many of our books, by the way, have been destroyed historically. Just to give you one example, Sheikh Tusi used to have a library, a big library in Karkh. Karkh is in the southern parts of Baghdad. As you know, Baghdad is divided into two. The river Tigris running right in the middle of Baghdad. The southern part was the Shia center. Sheikh Mufid, Sheikh Tusi, Sharif al-Murtada, they all taught there. And Sheikh Tusi had a library and a chair endowed. But because there were acrimony and riots between Sunnis and Shias, his whole library was burned. His library was burned. And this is just one instance of why many of our books were destroyed in history. And therefore he had to go to Najaf and started his own hawza there, if you like, in Najaf. At that time it was called Ghari. So one of the ladies who actually wrote a book was a person by the name of Uliya. Uliya was a daughter of the 4th Imam. Imam Zain al-Abidin had a daughter called Uliya, and she wrote a book. We do not have that book, but one of the biographers I mentioned earlier, biographers who wrote about books that they had heard about or who had seen, a biographer was called Najashi. One of our foremost biographers is a person called Ahmad bin Ali al-Najashi, and Najashi reports that Uliya had a book reported from Imam Zain al-Abidin alayhi salam. Sallu ala Muhammad. These ladies perform major roles, not only during the times of the Imams, but even after the Imams. some of the greatest scholars that we've had, even in recent times, what we call the mujtahida, were women. We don't only have mujtahids, we also have mujtahidas. As recently as in 1983, a famous one that I'll talk about in a few minutes, Nusrat Amin died in Iran. She not only received ijazah from the Ayatollah, she gave ijazahs to Ayatollahs too. Quite remarkable that a woman, we never think of a woman giving ijazah to another man, to a man. But here was a lady, Nusrat Amin, who died as recently as 1983. The famous scholars, in those days, women would not go to madrasa and study with men, unlike now. So what they would do is they would train the women in their own houses. Sometimes they would get famous scholars to come and teach their daughters because they valued knowledge. One of the things that we have always valued, especially in Shia Islam, is the inheritance of knowledge. So women would, Fatima of Nishapur, for example, she died in the year 1087, so 11th century we're talking of. She taught hadith in her father's madrasa, to women only. And we hear of another lady called Fatima al-Amili. Jabal Amil is what we now call Lebanon. In those days there was no Lebanon, there was only Greater Syria. Fatima Amili was the daughter of Shahidul Awwal. We have two main shaheeds, Shahidul Awwal and Shahidul Thani. Shahidul Awwal was executed for his belief in Constantinople. One of the greatest scholars that we have had was Shahidul Awwal. He was imprisoned. It is believed that he wrote his book on fiqh, on jurisprudence, while in prison. The second Shaheed wrote a commentary on Shahidul Awwal. So people write books even in prison. It is amazing, by the way, something that may be slightly off topic, but something that we should note. Our scholars preserved knowledge and transmitted that knowledge in different forms. I'm currently working on commentary on the Quran. That's my next book, inshallah. And I was amazed to find a person by the name of Sayyid Hashim al-Bahrani. Came from Bahrain, lived in the 17th century. He wrote 75 books, including a very famous tafsir of the Quran. What was so amazing about this Sayyid Hashim al-Bahrani was that most of the books were about the fadha'il and fadilat of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. There came a time in his life, in Sayyid Bahrani's life, Hashim al-Bahrani, that he could not even move. He was so sick. He was pretty much on the verge of death, basically. He called his students. He could not move his body, but he could move his mouth. He says, I cannot write anymore, but I'm going to dictate to you when I want you to write it down and print this particular book. And what was the book? The Fadila of Ali ibn Abi Talib over all the prophets of Ulul Azm prophets, apart from our last prophet. All the Ulul Azm prophets, the Fadila of Ali ibn Abi Talib over them, apart from the last prophet. That goes to show the value of knowledge within Shia Islam. So this Fatima al-Amili was the daughter of Shahidul Awwal. She was a great, we talk of faqih. She was a faqiha, very pious. And when her father died, I don't know how many of our ladies would do this. Very difficult. Of course, she gets her inheritance, which is half of the men. But she says, I don't want the money. She told her brothers, you give me your books, I will give you the money. She was willing to give her away her inheritance of money in lieu of books that they have also inherited because of their father was a great scholar writing so many books. So this shows Fatima, she was so well learned that many a time when people came to Shahidul Awwal, her father, to ask questions, he would say, don't ask me, go and ask Fatima. Go and ask my daughter. Similarly, another lady called Amina Khatun, she was the daughter of the famous Majlis. We have two Majlises, Majlis al-Awwal wa Thani. Majlis al-Awwal was the father of Majlis al-Thani, the famous author of Biharul Anwar is the second Majlis. But Majlis al-Awwal had a daughter called Amina. That she was so learned this Amina, that many a time her husband was also a scholar, would refer to her for a particular issue, for a particular question. And we can, as I said, I can go on and on about the role of women. There have been other women also. Zubaydah Shirazi, you may have heard of someone called Mullah Sadra. Mullah Sadra was a great scholar, theosophist, philosopher. His books are preserved to the extent that he was a mystic, basically. And you know, sometimes when you write in certain languages, not everybody can understand that language. So therefore, there's a very famous hadith from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet says, "Kallimun nas ala qadri uqulihim," that speak to people according to their level of understanding, Baba. Don't say everything to everybody, because not everybody can understand that. Mullah Sadra was such that he wrote so much that others thought that he was a heretic. So they basically banished him from Qum, a little place called Karak. But today, this man, when his time, people cursed him. Huh? But today, if you go to Tehran, you'll see Mullah Sadra Street. They acknowledge your greatness after you die. When he was alive, they never quite appreciated him. But after he died, they have Mullah Sadra Street, and almost every student in the university studies the books of Mullah Sadra. In any case, this lady, Zubaydah Shirazi, was the daughter of Mullah Sadra. She memorized the whole Quran, mastered literature, and wrote a commentary of the Quran also. A commentary on the Quran itself. To talk about Nusrat Amin, who I mentioned earlier, Nusrat Amin was the most prominent mujtahida in the 20th century, living from 1886 until 1983. Normally, in order for you to be acknowledged as a scholar, you need to have an ijtihad or the ijazah of ijtihad. Otherwise, every changu mangu will say, I'm a mujtahid. But if I come in front of you, and I'm not, but if I come to you and say, I'm a mujtahid, you have every right to say, where is the ijazah? Ijazah is basically a letter from my teacher saying that this person has attained that level of ijtihad. It's a certification, basically. And this lady, Nusrat Amin, got ijazah from several ayatullahs. And not only that, she gave ijtihad, and there are different ijazahs, by the way. Ijazah not only of khums. Whenever we think of ijazah, we think of khums only. But there is ijazah of ijtihad and of narrating hadith. She gave ijazahs to prominent ayatullahs also, including Ayatollah Bar'ashi and even Ayatollah Burujardi. We're talking of great scholars. She goes into that category. Indeed, one of the prominent ayatollahs in Qum, he passed away a few years ago, Ayatollah Sanai, who actually studied with her, says she was one of the best Shia scholars of the 20th century. Why was she so famous? Not only because she studied fiqh, but she wrote numerous works, including a 15-volume book on the Quran. Maqsad al-Irfan dar Ulum al-Quran is her book. They are available now. 15 volumes just on the Quran. And by the way, it's not easy to be an alim or an alima. You have to be continuously researching and writing. This lady, Nusrat Amin, was concerned not only for her education, but the education of women too. As you know, women were not well learned for a very long time, even in our own community, let alone other communities. Huh? In Zanzibar, when a woman attains 14, 15, kusha mambo, time for her to get married. In those days, I'm talking of the 50s and 60s. So she, in 1965, Nusrat Amin opened a girls' school in Iran. Today, by the way, just to show you how times have changed, there are more women than men in universities in Iran. More women scholars in Iran than male scholars in Iran. So she opened a high school for girls in 1965, and also in Isfahan, she opened a hawza for women also. The last person that I want to mention before, because my time is running short now, is a person by the name of Zohra Safati. Zohra Safati, to be exact, was a religious scholar, and she is the one who laid the foundation of Jamiatul Zahra today. Jamiatul Zahra most of us will have known there, will have known about it. It's a very famous university, if you like, or a hauza. It's more than a house, it's actually a university in Qum, only for ladies. Thousands of women have graduated from there. This lady, she got the ijaza, Zohra Safadi got ijaza from very famous ayatollahs, including Ayatollah Safi Gulpegani and Ayatollah Tabrizi. And she gave ijaza to more than 40 male scholars. 40 male scholars. Now, of course, we know that the number of women have increased dramatically. Najaf, I have to say, is not as well advanced as Qom, because Najaf is just coming up. As you know, Najaf was very much under suppression for a long time under Saddam. I'm talking of in terms of women. Najaf has always been there for men, but the number of women in Najaf is not as many as in Qom or as in Mashhad, because now women are given more opportunities and more liberal. And now you find that women are playing major roles in all different fields within Iran itself, in the Shia world also. I think it's important for us to remember then that we should mention at least parts of what I've said. You don't have to mention everything, especially to those, and there are some in our own community, who believe that women are looked down upon or women don't have any role in Islam. One of the reasons that I find that youths are alienated from Islam is because they think that we look down upon our women. On the contrary, and this came about, this lecture actually came about a few years ago when, this is the irony, non-Muslims contacted me. They said, we want to write a book on female religious authority in Shia Islam. Female religious authority in Shia Islam. We want to write a book and we want you to contribute a chapter. That's when I started researching into all this. But as I say, it's ironic that non-Muslims, and a book is printed by Edinburgh University Press in Scotland. It's not our people who are doing this. Sometimes non-Muslims write more about us than we do about ourselves. My final remark is this, my sisters and brothers. It is time that we wrote about ourselves. We talk about ourselves. Because if you don't talk about yourself, others will talk about you. And what they will say is not very nice. We need to train more female scholars, especially in the religious field, and especially when it comes to da'wah, for example, tabligh, etc. We do not have as many women as we should have. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.